Are you looking for innovative ways that your economic development team can support your city's small businesses? Well, Hub is the game-changing tool you've been searching for. Our digital and automated platform removes the administrative challenges of connecting with entrepreneurs, providing resources, and measuring the impact. To see how you can elevate your city's entrepreneurial community, check out joinhub.com. That's joinhuub.com for more information.
Hey y'all, coming to you from Jacksonville, Florida, this is GovLove, a podcast about local government brought to you by engaging local government leaders. I'm Ben Kittelson, Senior Consultant at RefTelis and GovLove co-host. We have a great episode for you today. We're going to be talking managing Edina. But first, the best way to support GovLove is to become an ELGL member. ELGL is a professional association engaging the brightest minds in local government. And you should mark your calendars. Our annual conference is coming up this fall, October 13th and 14th in Phoenix, Arizona. You can learn more about the conference and register by going to elgl.org/ELGL22. Now, let me introduce today's guest. Scott Neal is the city manager of the City of Edina, Minnesota, a position he's been in since 2010. He has over 30 years of experience in city management. He's led the cities of Eden Prairie, Minnesota, Northfield, Minnesota, Mount Pleasant, Iowa, and Norris, Tennessee. He's also served as the president of the Minnesota City County Management Association. So with that, welcome to GovLove, Scott. Thank you so much for taking the time to chat with us.
Great. Thanks, Ben. Thanks for having me.
Cool. So we have a tradition on the podcast to help our listeners get to know our guests a little better, to do a lightning round. So my first question for you, what book are you currently reading?
I am reading The Death of Expertise by Tom Nichols.
Oh, interesting. Very,
Yeah.
I imagine very relevant to your work sometimes.
Yes, unfortunately. Yes, it is.
Any takeaways, any enlightening from the
Well,
book so far?
yeah, I think the idea that, anybody can learn anything by watching a 5-minute YouTube video is both enlightening and frightening,
Yeah.
and I have to, as I'm concerned about it as a professional in this field, I also do it, right? I've
Yeah.
learned how to put sheetrock up by watching a video, and I'm not as good at it as a professional, but it's good enough. So
Yeah.
I think people look at our own professions like that as well, and that's something that's going to be with us from here on out.
Yeah. It's something I'm guilty of as well. Watching a YouTube video to replace a faucet or figure out street sweeping,
Yep, same thing.
Awesome. So next lightning round question. What was the last movie you saw in theaters or streamed?
In theater, it was Encanto with my 6-year-old granddaughter and my wife. Yeah.
Nice.
It wasn't as great as everybody says it was. That's what
okay.
Yeah.
Okay. The next lightning round question for you then. What was the first album that you bought?
This is back in the late 70s, and it was probably Boston by Boston.
Nice. Yeah, that'll take you back to
yes, it
an
does.
era.
Yes, it does.
Awesome. And then my last lightning round question for you. Where do you go for inspiration?
I am, my wife and I are fortunate to have a cabin on a lake in northwest Wisconsin, and that's where I go for inspiration. It's in the woods, and there's a lake, and it can be outside. It's a good place just to be quiet and think.
Yeah. Well, in Northwest Wisconsin, are you doing that year round? Like, so you're doing some winter trips too?
It's a 4-season cabin. So, yep, that I can do it all year long.
Nice. Very nice.
Yeah. Thanks.
Yeah. I feel like a winter getaway on a lake would be kind of a nice escape. If you're okay with that.
It's a great lake to fish. It's a great lake to ski and to ice skate on.
Awesome. Cool. Well, one thing, close listeners to the pod know that I like to ask is kind of understand folks' path into local government. And so for you, how'd you end up in this field, and kind of how'd you end up in Edina? What's been your path to local government?
My path to local government is started with an epiphany. When I was maybe 19 or 20, I took a class in urban politics at Iowa State University. And I had to read a book about L.P. Cookingham, the historic city manager from Kansas City. And that to me was my epiphany. I thought this is exactly what I want to do. I want to be involved in government, but I want to be hired, fired on merit, right? By
Yeah.
how good am I at my job? And from that point on, I just took every urban class I could take: urban design, urban psych, urban soc, urban politics, urban econ, urban agriculture, anything with urban in the title I took. And I got my bachelor's degree in economics there and my master's in public administration there. And I got my master's in late May of 1988, and I started my very first job as a city manager on June 1st of 1988. So about 5 days later, when
Wow.
I was 25, and I was in that town for 2 years, and then I came back to Iowa, to Mount Pleasant, Iowa. And so my career path has been that I started in a little town of 2,000 to a bigger town of 8,000 to a bigger town in Minnesota called Northfield, Minnesota, which was like 15, 16,000 when I moved there. And then to Eden Prairie, which was 65,000 when I moved there in 2002. And so Edina has been kind of the culmination of my career of moving from a little smaller, from a little small to big to big to bigger.
Yeah. Wow. So, and I can't imagine taking that top job fresh out of MBA school. What was that experience like? Kind of figure out who you are in the workplace and this job.
Uh,
And
I think it was based on overconfidence.
yeah.
That I could do it. I knew what I was doing. I happened to be a manager of a large student family housing area at Iowa State University at that time. So, it was an area of, I don't know, a couple thousand apartments and families living in them. So,
Mm.
it was analogous to a small town actually. And it had some of the same pressures. So it was a great sort of formative experience that I had in graduate school, in addition to the academics. But yeah, I was confident from that. This is what I wanted to do, and I was going to get a job doing what I wanted to do. It was really exciting at the time, and it was a great little town. Norris was an experimental city that was built from scratch by the federal government at the same time they were building a big TVA dam in the
Oh,
early
wow.
1930s. So they bought enough land and they built the dam, and all the workers at the dam, the engineers, the guys moving concrete and all of that, they all lived in this little town. The feds built the streets, the parks, the houses, the commercial areas, everything, and that area kind of survives to this day. So it's a national historic city,
Huh.
um, just because of its birth.
That's fascinating. That'd be a really
Yeah,
cool place to get to know. Yeah.
it really was, and it's not too far from Oak Ridge, where there's a lot of nuclear weapons being built and being decommissioned at the same time, just north of Knoxville in East Tennessee.
Yeah. Cool. What, did, Now imagine, it's your first job. You're figuring it out. But
Mm-hmm.
were there some mistakes that you made that maybe you learned
Oh,
from and kind
yeah,
of?
yeah. In 30 years, I think I've made almost every mistake you could make. One that I'm reminded of every year about this time, right? Because in Minneapolis today, it's going to be 95 degrees,
Mhm.
was that we had a garbage contract with a garbage hauler in this little town, and it was a July 1 to June 30 contract, and June 30 was rolling along, is getting closer to us. I had some disputes that I needed to settle with this garbage vendor, and I said, "But here's the deal, or you walk." And they walked,
Oh
and
no.
yeah, and so the idea of people putting their garbage out to the curb when it was 95 degrees for a couple days or a week at a time, that was a bad idea, right? So
Yeah.
we resolved the issue in their favor pretty quickly after the stench of week old garbage was out everywhere. So I learned from that point on, if you have a garbage contract, make it expire in the winter when things are colder and all that stinky garbage can freeze up, perhaps.
Oh, that's great advice. That's
There you go. Great advice right there.
time your contracts for the winter with the
Yeah,
garbage hauler.
that's right. That's right.
That's great. Well, and I think I know when I was going through MPA school, your kind of career path was one that I think was maybe not sold, but but pitched to students as like a way to get into local government and get into city management. Starting small and kind of moving around and up through the ranks of larger cities. But I'm curious, from your experience, like how was that on your family? Like, because that's that I imagine moving every few years is a little hard and it can be difficult having to reset each time. But what was your kind of experience going through that
Yeah, yeah,
over your
that
career?
that is that is the difficult part of that kind of career strategy, is it in it, because you can become the, if you want to get out of MPA school and become the assistant to the assistant to the assistant of
Mhm.
whatever, that's a little more stable
Yeah.
probably, right? Because if, especially if there's room for growth in that organization. For me, I also had uh, the additional burden, however you want to take it. We had a couple of kids at the time
Yeah.
when I moved down there, so it was my wife, my two sons, and myself. And so we moved there for 2 years, and then we moved back to Mount Pleasant, Iowa for 6 years, and then we moved again to Northfield, Minnesota. So those moves, yeah, they were stressful on everyone.
Hmm.
When I got to Northfield, I was fortunate enough to be able to work in Northfield for 6 years, and then in Eden Prairie, which is about 45 minutes away, for 8 years. But I stayed living in Northfield. We never
Hmm.
moved to Eden Prairie, so that's where my kids got a chance to grow up, and that's their hometown, and that's where they went to high school, graduated from high school. So we were fortunate in that manner for sure, that we didn't have to move again after Northfield. Yeah, but it's tough.
Yeah. Yeah. You almost have to pick a place at some point where it's like
Yeah,
let them finish out school and all that stuff.
that's right. That's right. Because yeah, my oldest son started school in Mount. Both all my kids started school in Mount Pleasant, Iowa. They finished school in Northfield, Minnesota. So they had one kind of school move like that, and that was really ideal. That's hard to get.
Yeah. Well, and we'll get to kind of the work you're doing at in Edina, but I'm just curious. Do you have any advice for folks that are kind of maybe want to do a career path like yours, where they're kind of moving and moving up through different size cities, or any
Yeah,
lessons learned?
I do a fair amount of mentoring work
Hmm.
with aspiring city managers, and this is one of the, we talk a lot about this career path, and for folks who want to stay in the city, in the Twin Cities, they're fortunate, right? Because
Yeah.
there's 100+ local governments in the 7 county metro area in the Twin Cities of Minnesota. So there are a lot of opportunities for people that can start in a very small town that's within the metro area and kind of move from town to town, from towns to cities, and stay within the general area here. So this has
Mm.
been a good place for people to find that career path here. But they have been a couple of people who have done the move to the hinterland and then back to the city. And I think you learn a lot. You learn a lot in a very small town in rural America. When in my first job, I was the guy. I was the
Yeah.
finance director. I was the HR director. I was the park and rec director. I was the public works director. I was everything. And every time I've moved up in terms of a level of sophistication in the cities I've worked for, I've done a little less, right? So in my
Yeah.
second job, I had a finance director and a park and rec director, so I didn't have to do those anymore. In my next job, I had all those professions, and when I got to Eden Prairie, my job was more about leadership and less about direct management, and
Hmm.
that was the big move for me. And it took till I got to my fourth city for that to happen.
Oh, interesting. So, how would you define that difference? I guess then is it just the less kind of day to day logistics and more
Yeah,
setting
yeah,
direction?
yeah. It's setting direction. It's making sure that people are set up to be successful, and people
Hmm.
in this case might mean the executive leaders, the department directors or division managers in the city, making sure they have the resources, making sure they know how to keep me informed so I can give messaging in the community and to the council. But it's really for me, it's in Eden Prairie and Edina, it's been about how do I understand what the council wants us to do, and how do I translate that to the people that actually do the work, right?
Hmm.
So that's been what I've been doing for about the last 20 years.
Huh. Fascinating. Very cool. Yeah, and imagine it takes a different skill set. Like I can see why some city managers end up just being city managers of small towns because you get to do a lot, and
Yeah.
it's maybe not quite the same as what you're talking about. Well, how
Yeah.
did? Yeah.
The weakness, I'd say the weakness in my experience is that I've always been the boss, right? I've never been the assistant. I've never
Mhm.
been a community development director or a finance director. So I don't really have a full I don't really have a full appreciation of what it means to be at that level in the organization. And sometimes that could be helpful to me if I was able to have more empathy for them.
Yeah. Yeah. Interesting. Well, thanks for the trip down memory lane. We can
Sure, sure,
shift
sure.
gears a little to Edina, but
Yeah.
yeah, that was fascinating. So, I guess for maybe our listeners that haven't been to your city, can you tell them a little about kind of Edina? I mean, you guys are obviously part of the Twin Cities area, but what should folks know about your city?
Sure. Well, the Twin Cities of Minneapolis and St. Paul, Minnesota, the metropolitan area is about 3 million people. Edina is 15 square miles, 53,000 people. We are an affluent suburb that's sort of on the southwest corner of Minneapolis. So we border Minneapolis. We have seven bordering cities
Wow.
that around us. So cities of Richfield, Bloomington, Eden Prairie, Hopkins, Minnetonka, St. Louis Park, and Minnesota. Or excuse me, Minneapolis. So we are surrounded by all cities. It's a city that was founded by Scottish and Irish farmers in the late 1880s. So it's got some history here.
Hmm.
Beautiful neighborhoods, great schools, a smart, successful, engaged residents. Right. This is a place where a lot of executives from the area industry and live, and their families live here. So yeah, it's a great place to work. There's a high demand for high quality services,
Mm.
and really we've got good resources here. So we can afford to make those services high quality and high level for the folks who live here.
Yeah, and I imagine that that high expectation level and engagement level, maybe challenges is the wrong word, but maybe presents some opportunities for the city. And like, how
It,
does
it
that kind of maybe affect your
It
what?
absolutely does. I meet with every new full-time employee at the time of hire, and I tell them this, that our residents are the most demanding
Mm.
residents I've ever worked for, but they're also the most supportive residents I've ever worked for.
Yeah.
We're not in a race to the bottom in terms of can we have the lowest tax rate in the Twin Cities. We are in a race to provide them the quality services they want, and our residents have a feeling and a good connection between how high quality city services impact their quality of life and the value of their real estate. So it's a good place. It's a really a good place to be.
Yeah, that's kind of exciting. You get to figure out like how do we become best in class in all these different ways. Yeah.
Exactly. I'd say the times where I've gotten in trouble here have been times when we tried to cut a corner or save a buck when we
Mm.
when we shouldn't have done that, right? That's what our residents aren't looking for that. They're looking for the best snow and ice removal from their streets, the best parks, the best police and fire services. That's what they want. So that's
Yeah.
what we try to give them.
I feel like you got a lot of our listeners that are very jealous right now. So that's cool to hear.
Okay. Not the
um,
goal here. Not the
yeah.
goal.
Well, but it kind of prepping for this interview. One of the things that I read about that I saw that you were proud of was kind of your work with the city's work with the Edina Housing Foundation on affordable housing. So obviously, you like you said, the community is pretty high income and like lots of great services. So, what does that affordable housing work look like in Edina?
So, the two sides of having an affluent housing market are that it's great for your tax base, but it's hard on affordable housing options, right? So
Yeah.
the median value of a single family home that sold in Edina in 2021 was $972,000.
Whoa.
Um, that that's like I said, it's great for your tax base, but how do you provide affordable housing in that level of environment where
Yeah.
every square foot is worth a fair amount of money? We have chosen to do that through intervention in the development process. So
Hmm.
we have established an inclusionary zoning ordinance and program here that requires it requires the construction or the provision of affordable units, mostly rental, but not always. When a new multifamily construction is being built, or excuse me, when they are seeking the necessary regulatory approvals to build here. And that has been pretty effective for us. And we have been working to do that on a basis here for about the last 6 years, I think, about
Hmm.
6 or 7 years, actually. We have hired a full time affordable housing development manager who's pretty skilled in that field, and she's been successful in putting a number of deals together in Edina that provide affordable units.
Hmm. What's the community kind of feedback been around that? Because I imagine there's probably two sides of the same coin of like, hey, this is unaffordable, but I also like the value of my home staying the way it is. So yeah, what has that been like?
Yeah, I would say the reaction has been um, wondering why,
Yeah.
why do we need affordable housing in the town? But also, I think the appreciation for folks who are interested in that subject as residents. They know the city is trying. They know that there is value to having an income, all income levels, be able to live in the community and appreciate what's going on here. So that part of it, I think, has both of those impulses show themselves whenever there's a new affordable housing project coming together. We've done a pretty good job of balancing them
Mm-hmm.
so far.
Mm-hmm. Well, imagine in a region like the Twin Cities, like some of these problems are like are across jurisdictions, right? So is there like a regional component of this, or I know like we had the planning folks from Minneapolis come on after they changed some of their comprehensive plan language around single family zoning. So I'm just curious, like how much of that pressure is regional, how much of that is influencing, your neighbor influencing you at all, or maybe vice versa. So,
Yeah, well, there is a very important regional partner in the Twin Cities called the Metropolitan Council,
mm-hmm.
and they do a fair amount of planning for large scale shared infrastructure, like transportation and wastewater treatment. So we all share in the Twin Cities a single large wastewater treatment system that's operated by the Metropolitan Council. Huge advantage to us in terms
Yeah.
of a region. But they also do a lot with reviewing comprehensive plans from every community in the Twin Cities, making sure that those plans are consistent not only with the region-wide plan but also the plans of the neighboring cities. And so when Minneapolis decided to sort of make some very fundamental changes in the nature of residential zoning, the Met Council was a place where some of that dialogue came out.
Mm.
We have not followed suit in that path, and I don't think we will.
Yeah.
Not that that's not right for Minneapolis. It's just fine for them. I just think in our community it's down the line a piece before they would think of doing away with R1 residential zoning here.
Yeah. Interesting. Um, and then, again, in prepping, I saw, you guys have a race and equity department, which I think, if I remember right, was started in 2018 or so. Does that sound
That's
right?
right. Yep. Yep.
Yeah. So how did that come about, and kind of what are some of the focus areas of that work?
So it came about because there was a strong interest in our city council at that time for what was happening in the region and in the community around race and equity issues. And we had this dialogue with the council about, well, what are we doing, or what can we do, or what do we have the capacity to do? And I told the council at that point, every race and equity is part of everybody's job, right?
Mm.
Everybody's doing a little bit of it. But if you want to take the next step and have this be something important to our organization and have somebody work on it, full time, we need a body, we
Yeah.
need a full-time employee to coordinate that for us, and they agreed. So we appointed a task force around race and equity issues in the community. The task force produced a set of recommendations for the council around city services, city facilities, and city policies. And then one of their top recommendations was to select and employ a full-time race and equity manager. So that's what we have right now. Her name is Heidi Lee. She does a great job for us.
Awesome. What were, some of those, I don't know, programmatic, or you mentioned facilities, but things that were on that list of to-do list for her once she,
Sure,
she
sure.
came in?
Yeah, it was a to-do list of 80 some
Oh,
items,
geez.
right? It was taking a look at policies and practices in our police department. It was taking a look at how do we fund scholarships for students to participate in our Parks and Rec programs. How do we decide what kind of art and photographs to put up in city facilities? What are our policies around affordable housing? What are our policies around renting city facilities? All of those sorts of things, and much much more. Those ended up being sort of the province of this task force, and they opined on all of it at one point or another.
Well, I think I read on the website too, one of the, I don't know if focus areas, right, where one of the initiatives was around talking about deed restrictions and covenants, and I can't remember what's the right word, the discriminatory covenants and
Yeah,
deeds.
yeah, restrictive covenants.
Yeah.
So so Edina became a city in 1888,
Mm-hmm.
but it was the place in the 1910s, 20s, and 30s where there was a kind of a small explosion of suburban growth, right? There was a couple of developers that came into Edina and started building higher end homes, and they were hoping to attract people from Minneapolis to move out here, and because there was a rail system that was being built, passenger rail, to connect Edina to downtown Minneapolis. So that was happening in the 1920s and 30s. They built a number of homes here and included restrictive covenants in them
Mm-hmm.
that really only allowed people of the Caucasian race, is what they would say, to buy and live in homes and many homes in the neighborhood. Though all of those restrictive covenants became unenforceable as housing law kind of kept up, federal housing and local housing laws overturned them kind of piece by piece in the 50s, 60s, and 70s. So they're unenforceable, but there were many people who didn't know that their home had that kind of hidden in its history.
Hmm.
And so when people began to discover that, they wanted to renounce it, right? They wanted to
Yeah.
make sure that there was something placed in the title of their home that said, I formally renounce this," and there's some other language around how to do that, and there a program built up in the Twin Cities to help people with that, and the program is called Just Deeds, right? So Just Deeds, DEEDS,
Yeah.
to try to attract people to do that. Our role in that has been to help connect our residents who may know or may not know that their house had that restricted covenant. We can't do that for them, only the
Mm-hmm.
property owner can. So if somebody has a question about how to do it, we advise them how to do it. And the program, the Just Deeds program, has a number of lawyers who volunteer their time to help people renounce this piece of history out of their land, real
Yeah.
estate title. So it's really quite an interesting program.
Yeah. That is very interesting.
Mhm.
Well, I imagine it helps make the case for why a city like Edina would want a race and equity department, because there's some of this history, and the more
Yeah,
you know about it, the more you can argue for more initiatives, right?
that's right. That's right.
Yeah. Cool. Very cool.
Yeah.
Well, to switch gears, not too abruptly, but I know, we were on a call together not too long ago about the City of Edina's fellowship program. So I'd love to talk about that. So what can you talk, maybe start with, like, just kind of why you have a fellowship program and kind of the shape and structure of it?
Sure. I have in my career been fortunate enough to be in places where I could spend time and money to help mentor kind of the next generation of city managers. I did that in a little bit in Northfield, a little bit more in Eden Prairie. But when I got to Edina, I had the opportunity to do it on a more formal scale. And so we established the Edina City Management Fellowship here to identify people who were interested in being city managers someday and hire them full time. They become a full time benefited employee to come into our organization and learn, right? Learn the basics, the fundamentals of what we do in this field. So I've also been fortunate in Edina to have a pretty strong leadership team. So fi- uh, finance director, assistant city manager, public works director, city engineer, police chief, fire chief, folks like that, who have learned over the years how to work with these folks and to help them learn about those individual disciplines as well. The thing that I think is unique, maybe it's unique about our program, is that it's a finite experience, right?
Mm.
So at the end of the term, the first ones were 12-month fellowships, but now we do 24-month, so 2-year fellowships. You got to go, right? You got to go. You got to go somewhere else. So at the end, so as we're getting near the end of that time period, uh, the fellows are looking for a job, and they can use us as they can use everybody that works here as references, and we're here to help them get those full-time jobs. So I've had in Edina, we've had uh, 8 fellows, and they are all gainfully employed in the fields of city management, except for one who works at ELGL,
Yeah.
and we're very proud of her too. But the number 9, her name is Jillian Straub, and Jillian is coming to start her fellowship with us on July 5th. So we're excited to host her and to help her get into this line of work.
Very cool. Well, and Jillian, if you're listening, this is a great episode for you to learn about your place of employment and
Sure
your
would be.
manager. So,
Yeah.
well, so I definitely want to get to the finite nature of it, but I'm curious around kind of recruitment and then how you set up their day to day work. What is how do you go out and find these folks? Is there a local MPA program you're working with? Or are you working with ICMA? And then what is their full time job look like? Is it special projects, kind of assistant to the city manager type work, or do you kind of move them around the organization?
So where do I find these people? The place that I start at first is been University of Kansas,
Hmm.
the MPA program there, widely recognized in America as being the top city management program in the country. I will usually connect with the department leadership at KU, set up a time to interview students. All of their students go to the ICMA conference, the International City Management Association conference in the fall. So I will connect with KU academic leaders. They make sure that the students know that I'm going to be there and that if they're interested in interviewing for this is a great opportunity to do that. I would say more than half of, I think 5 of the 8 fellows that we've had have come from KU. The others have come from local universities, University of Minnesota, Hamline University, and Minnesota State Mankato. But KU has been our most fertile grounds to find folks who are interested in this line of work.
Mm-hmm. And then once they're kind of on board, how do you assign, or what do you assign to them? What's the
Yeah,
kind of work that they're doing?
yeah. So the kind of work they're doing, first and foremost, we do a lot of touring, right? We do a
Yeah.
lot of talking at them. I want them to do a lot of listening. I want them to be at the table. So they're included in all of our leadership team meetings, and they have a weekly meeting with me and the assistant city manager. I want them to be listening to the kinds of things that we're dealing with, how we talk about them, Later, I'll probably sit down with them and process what they heard, and I'll do that throughout the first year of the fellowship. But yeah, they do get a kind of a list of special projects and ways that they can fit into the different working departments, so they can do the same kind of thing there: learn, watch, and learn. Um, I put that list together jointly, right? So before
Hmm.
they even come, I say, here's a list of stuff we think is important to you. And we want to hear from you too. So, what would you like to do while you're here? I like to think of it as we have 24 months to prepare somebody for that first interview.
Hmm.
And what are they going to be asked in that first interview? I have a good idea of what the questions are going to be asked. I want I want our fellow to have great answers,
Yeah.
experiences that they've had, things that they've seen, things that they've worked on. So we sort of, we kind of back engineer our way to what experiences do we need to provide them so that they have um, positive interview experiences
Yeah.
and past experiences to get a new job.
Huh. That's a probably a super helpful way to frame kind of their work. But so what's
Hmm.
maybe an example to be like, hey, I know this would be a really helpful,
Yeah,
thing to bring to a first job that you would assign to
participating
someone.
participating in a union collective bargaining process
Wow.
for one,
Yeah.
supervising employees, being involved in hiring someone, being involved in discipline of someone, producing a report for the city council that's delivered at a city council meeting,
Mm-hmm.
sitting in on board and commission meetings, taking an active role in one of those board and commissions, putting together the annual council trip to Washington, D.C. to participate in the National League of Cities conference.
Cool.
All of those are all kinds of things that develop skills that they will need when they become city managers.
Yeah. Wow. Those are great. Yeah. That's awesome. Well, and then so at the top you mentioned that it is finite. So I'm curious because I would say one of the arguments that if I were in your shoes or in another organization where I wanted to start a program like this, one of the arguments I might make is this can help us develop our bench and build leaders for within our organization. But it seems like the way you've approached this is that no, this is for the profession. We're going to push them out. So how come you frame the program that way?
Because I wanted them to have I wanted to magnify their influence in this field, right?
Mm.
If I go out and find these great people and then keep them all to myself, good for Edina, but what does that do for the profession and what does
Yeah,
that do for other communities? I think this is a way we can put smart people into small towns and have them grow their careers and magnify, the benefits they're going to bring to their residents. So that's why I've thought about it like that.
yeah, yeah. I like that. Very cool. So, have
Mhm.
you had any pressure that like, hey, why are we letting these good people walk out the door, or
Uh,
everybody kind of on the same page with that?
no, I'd say no because everybody here has a pretty good understanding of how the thing works. And
Yeah,
so, what happens, of course, is when we get closer to the time where it's for them to go somewhere, everybody in the office who works with the fellow says, "Can't we keep this one?" They're not a puppy.
yeah,
They've got lives and feelings, and they want to progress in their career. No, they gotta go. And
yeah.
so far, this has been it. Nobody gets kicked to the curb without a job. I will say that they all get a job, and
Yeah,
they're all able to move on to a place where they can provide value and help people in a new community.
that's great. Very cool.
Hmm?
Awesome. So, if one of our listeners wanted to start a similar kind of program in their community, what advice would you give them, or kind of things that they should keep in mind?
Hmm. I would say I think you want to give some thought to that, right? Do you
Yeah,
want to produce a program that produces one person for the world, or that you get to keep and manage until that one person moves on? Or do you want to create be part of a system that helps feed folks into the world, and that's
Yeah.
what I have chosen to do. I would say it's make sure that your immediate office staff and the administration functions of your city, but also your executive leadership team, whoever is on that, make sure they understand what it is and how they can be helpful, and that you need their help. Um, I would also say make sure your city council or board understands that this person is there to provide work, that they get
Mhm.
paid and treated like a regular employee. Um, but that's important as well, because I think in our program has gotten a lot of positive attention, and my council is proud of it too, right?
Mhm.
They understand that they're part of it existing, and they're excited about it, and they've gotten a lot of positive attention for it too.
Yeah. Well, and it also, just from you're talking about it, it seems like carving out some of your own time to dedicate towards this and
Oh,
be
for
available.
sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. This is a this demands a lot of time, right?
Yeah.
So, and I would say and a lot of it is simple time, taking the person to meetings, outside of the professional meetings outside of our city, making sure they understand who they're talking to, and processing different situations for them. I spend a lot of time just talking and listening and talking with the fellows as they kind of grow to understand what role the city manager plays and what's going on in Edina, kind of in the perspective of the rest of the regional area too.
Yeah. Yeah, that's really cool. Cause I imagine that's where, if I were to put myself in their shoes, that's where you're learning probably the most, is in those kind of almost debrief conversations about like,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yep. It is. It is.
Awesome. Very cool. So, and we'll be sure to link. I think you have a page on your website about the program, and we can link to that in our
Yeah.
show notes.
Sure.
Cool.
Thanks.
What else? What other kind of trans council initiatives that are going on in Edina that our listeners ought to know about, or you want to share?
Well, one of our big ones this year is we will have a referendum later this fall on an imposition of a local option sales tax.
Mm.
In Minnesota, we have this peculiar process where the city has to go to the state legislature, ask the state legislature for the opportunity to have a referendum at the local level to decide whether or not you want to have this tax. So you have to do some convincing of state legislators to allow you to do, a pretty basic democratic function of
Yeah.
deciding whether we should tax ourselves or not. We have some big projects here that have been sitting for a long time waiting for a funding source. So
Mm.
this is a great opportunity for that funding source to come up. And so there'll be a referendum on I think a 39.3 million dollar local option sales tax referendum later this fall. And
Cool.
we're spending a lot of time talking about it, and what is taxed and what is not, and how does the money flow, and what will they get for their money. A lot of those kind of discussions we'll do all summer long and through the fall.
Yeah. And I assume it's helping to fund like a CIP program, or like what?
Yes,
Yeah.
yes, yes. Yep. So we'll borrow some money, and then we'll go out and do some specific park projects, and then the debt service is paid through this local option sales tax.
Cool. Very cool. Awesome. Um, cool. Well, yeah. I mean, park projects. That's very exciting stuff. Hopefully, people will be on board for that.
I hope so. I hope so. Because otherwise, they're big enough where those projects probably don't get done for quite a while if this funding source doesn't come about. So we got to talk about that in a straightforward way too.
Yeah. Yeah. Awesome. So, is there anything else that you're working on that you want to share before we kind of end our conversation today?
Hmm. No. This time of year in an election year, we have elections this fall. It's just to be careful. Don't cause a stir.
Yeah.
Don't cause any trouble until the people have had a chance to vote. It's easy to make self-inflicted wounds in an election year. So we try
Yeah.
not to do that
Yeah.
at this time of year.
Well, and I mean, I imagine in your time in city management, you've dealt with a lot of different councils. So I'm curious on your perspective. Like, how do you manage to, like, when you have new council members coming on? Like, how do you, it's because it's a combination of onboarding, but also figuring out, they're your boss and figuring out what their priorities are and balancing that with the rest of
Yeah.
the board. Like, how do you approach that?
Well, I'm a strong believer in representative democracy.
Mm-hmm.
And to me, that means that council members are key to our connection, to our legitimacy, really, to our connection to our residents. Nobody's ever elected me to anything, right?
Mm-hmm.
So my legitimacy for my job really comes from my 5 members of the city council, whose legitimacy comes from being elected by the residents of this community. So I pay a great deal of attention to what it is they want to see in the community. Um, and I often talk about, if they'll tell me the what, I'll tell them the how.
Mm.
Because I think from that perspective, that's where my expertise is best placed in the organization. I think they have a lot better idea about knowing what the vision of the future is for the community, how to talk to residents about that vision. So that's the kind of connection I want to have with my council, and I've got a really strong council right now, and I've had councils that haven't been so strong and haven't
Mm-hmm.
been very good,
Yeah.
frankly. And the one that I have right now is really tops. They're really good.
Yeah. And is your approach for kind of identifying that what? Because I imagine, probably any community, you have as many opinions on the vision as there are members of council. But how do you help them come to maybe a more unified one, or one that you can figure out the how for?
Well, it's through a lot of discussion and dialogue.
Yeah.
Most of that is done in open council sessions and open meetings, but some of it occurs in one-on-one and two-on-one meetings, kind of behind the scenes,
Mm.
and trying to get a sense of what it is that people want, and a little bit of why they want it, but more of the what. And
Yeah.
so I think I spend probably more than half my time kind of tending to elected officials, and the other half of the time internally. And I'm able to do that because I've got a great assistant city manager here. Her name is Lisa Schaefer, and she is great on the internal operations side. So that leaves me with the freedom to have that kind of work priority here, and it's very helpful, I think, organizationally.
Yeah. Well, I imagine, that's, when I think about, if I were ever a city manager, that feels like that part of the job, that getting everybody on the same page around what the what is.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's like almost the hardest thing. And it's almost hard to know how to do it without having done it. Or some days it feels like that.
Yeah, I think that's fair. I wish I had an easier answer for you. We've got a survey we do, and then we just take the results of the survey. That's not what we do.
Yeah.
It's a lot of discussion and dialogue, and finding out what people's parameters are, what the council members' parameters are in terms of policy choices, and then trying to work to produce something that will work for as many of them as possible.
Huh. Yeah. Awesome. Well, that was fascinating. I appreciate the little tangent there.
Sure.
So we have a traditional last question on the podcast.
Right.
It's sometimes the hardest for folks, so I'll give you a fair warning. If you could be the GovLove DJ, what song would you pick as the exit music for this episode?
Well, it's always my walk-on music too. It's Bohemian Like You by the Dandy Warhols.
Nice. Awesome. Yeah, I'm glad you had a walk-on song ready to go too. That's good.
It's just got a great catch from the start. The percussion and organ and guitar. You just gonna love it, Ben.
Perfect. Well, awesome. Well, that ends our episode for today. Scott, thank you so much for coming on and talking with me and sharing your expertise and your experience.
Thanks for having me.
Awesome. And for our listeners, GovLove is brought to you by engaging local government leaders. And the best way to support GovLove is to become an ELGL member. You can reach us online at elgl.org/GovLove or on Twitter at the handle @GovLovePodcast. As a reminder, the ELGL Annual Conference is coming up October 13th and 14th in Phoenix, Arizona. You can learn more and register at elgl.org/ELGL22. And you can subscribe to GovLove on your favorite podcast app. And if you're already subscribed, go tell a friend or colleague about this podcast. Help us spread the word that GovLove is the go-to place for local government stories. And with that, thank you for listening. This has been GovLove, a podcast about local government.
And the feelings of bohemian like you. Yeah, like you. Yeah, like you.